Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Stock Market Today, sponsored by Interactive Brokers. It's Alyssa Corum here with Ed Carson, and on today's rundown, we're going to be giving you an update on the chip sector, as well as taking a look at the charts of Trade Desk and Chipotle, which is set to report its earnings on Tuesday. But first, let's take a look at the major indexes. So we were able to finish up across the board. The NASDAQ up about 0.7%, the S&P 500 up only about 0.3%, and the Dow just slightly in the green. But the uptrend still very much intact here. I think there were a little bit of worries on Friday given the downside reversal.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if all of that worry has gone away, but good to see an update.
It was nice to see an update to sort of break that trend. I mean, but basically we're sort of still in that little range we've been having for a while. I mean, there's a lot of earnings coming up. I mean, you can see the NASDAQ is right at its highs. The other indexes are too. I mean, essentially, a lot of earnings. And you got the Fed next week. There's still China trade out there. So it's hard to really say, let's make a lot of bets until at least some of the earnings come in this week.
Yeah, well, chip stocks were notable movers on the upside today. Looking at the top industry group movers, the various sub-industries were among the top, and we want to take a look at the Van Eck Vectors Semiconductor ETF, which was our stock of the day today.
Yeah, a little bit of a misname today.
Right.
But yeah, it did really well. It already was in buy range and moved higher. There's some other ETFs, the SOXX, that did hit a buy zone today. But I mean, this is a way to play the chip rally. A lot of these chips are not in a buy zone. AFD has been a leader. Micron sort of came out of a base that was probably a little too weak, but some other things that there's not a really great way to play a lot of these stocks, that there wasn't really anything out there. So it's a way to do that. A lot of earnings coming up. And so this is one way to get in, get some diversification. It still can be volatile. This has big moves, but you know, it's definitely, you know, it's a good sign to see the chips moving along, and this is definitely a good way to play it.
That's right, yeah. A couple of notable names, I think, you know, Intel, Xilinx, they're working on bases. So if you were to take a look at those individual names, not buyable at this time, but like you said, earnings are on the horizon.
Yeah.
So we'll be having to focus on those names that could potentially move big on their reports. But moving on, let's check in on Trade Desk, which is closing in on a flat base buy point. It's been looking pretty strong this year, even though speaking of earnings, on its last earnings report, it fell pretty hard that day, but it was able to quickly recover.
Yeah, this stock has some big moves. That's definitely so on earnings and other situations. But it's been really strong this year. This is a digital ad marketing firm, so they compete against Facebook and Google to a certain extent. You know, we put this. It was actually the IBD 50 growth stocks to watch selection today, based off of that flat base buy point. We also was added to Swing Trader today.
That's right.
Sort of like there's sort of a handle-like sort of resistance point that it was sort of moving above. So that's sort of in a place where early aggressive investors could jump in. You know, it's just been one of the stock market leaders this year.
Yeah, and earnings are coming up in early August, so I guess the question is, you know, with the swing trade, it is a shorter term time horizon, but for investors interested in a name like this, would you be able to get enough cushion ahead of that earnings report in a few weeks? Strong growth is expected for sure on an annual standpoint in 2020, so that it has that going for it.
It has a lot of hallmarks that you'd like to see in a stock.
All right, and Chipotle, speaking of growth that we like to see, is set to report its earnings on Tuesday, and analysts are expecting earnings to rise 29%, and it's been moving in a pretty tight range ahead of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's sort of, in a way it's messy, and it's a way it's very tight. It's actually we have a 749.35 buy point. This is sort of what I have a 3 weeks tight that formed a while ago. But if you look at the relative strength line, you can see how the stock has really been fairly steady versus the general market for several months. That's in good markets and bad markets. But it's been doing pretty well heading into earnings, which is a reason why maybe you shouldn't be buying right now.
Yes, exactly. History shows that it is not a good idea to be outright buying stocks ahead of their quarterly earnings reports. You know, it's one thing if you have a pretty big cushion and a lot of conviction, and the numbers are, you know, there's good expectations for that. But if you're not already in it, you're playing with fire.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we suggest sometimes an earnings option strategy. You buy some call options if they're not too expensive. That way, yeah, you might have a loss because if it doesn't work out, but you've contained it. And if if the stock goes up a lot, then hey, you can enjoy that. But that's the way to play it.
Yeah, or playing the gap.
Playing the earnings gap. And so, yeah, you just don't want to be in a situation where a stock goes down 10, 15% and there's nothing to do.
Right.
You're stuck with a big loss.
Yeah, that's more of a bet than an investment
That's
at that point.
It's really roulette. It's black or red, and and we're having a lot of stocks, and a lot of stocks have had nice gains with a lot of quality stocks, and investors might be going into it. And unless you have a good cushion, you may want to think about taking partial or full profits and just waiting it out and just starting anew.
Yeah, exactly. Well, some thoughts for you there on this Monday as earnings season ramps up. So make sure you are heading to investors.com to check out our continuing coverage of not just earnings season, but all the stocks that you need to be watching. All right, everyone, thanks so much for joining us. And we want to let you know that we do have a webinar coming up in the spirit of Shark Week. We are going to tell you how to trade like a market shark with 5 buying strategies for bigger profits. Is coming up on the 30th. So make sure you head to investors.com/webinar for all the details. All right, everyone. Thanks once again for joining us this afternoon. We hope you have a great day and we'll see you tomorrow.